So let's talk about our text for today. So we'll do it. We'll start at the text earlier, as opposed to waiting till
Here,
11:20
keep
like we
that
did last
distraction
time.
going.
So we're going to talk about Acts today and Thessalonians. So I'm really curious as to how I'm supposed to preach Acts 17. So I can't wait for you to tell me how I'm supposed to. Karen's like, hey, I'm telling you.
You could take that one right there.
No, don't worry, I got one. But I want to hear how you get. How would you preach Acts 17? What about Acts 17 is really speaks a lot to you, or how because when they give us a text for the week, they want you to preach on it, or they want you to get something out of it. So what are you getting out of this particular text? So we'll talk about that. So
I know I was surprised when I started reading 17 and talking about Thessalonia.
yeah, and so before we begin, let's talk a little bit about just Acts in general. So here's the interesting thing about Acts, which I thought was what they brought up pretty well in the commentary that I had off of Working Preacher, was so if you think of, so the Gospels end us with the community of faith being just basically the disciples and some more people, but not a lot of people, and they're all centered in what town or city? Jerusalem. So the church starts out in Jerusalem, okay? And then we learn, as we go through the book of Acts, we learn a little bit more about Peter, because Peter was the person that Jesus said, we'll build the church on you. You'll be the rock, and so the church gets bigger within Jerusalem. And then something happens. Then they start talking to who? So then at this time too, all the people who in the Christian church at this particular point in time are what type of Christians? Jewish. So we're in Jerusalem, they're all Jewish Christians, and then suddenly Peter talks to a Gentile. Dun, dun, dun. So the narrative changes. So you had this small group of people. It was the Jesus movement back after Jesus died was small. It was not billions of people. It probably could fill this room with the amount of people that were believing in Jesus at that time. And so in the book of Acts, you're suddenly seeing the gospel being spread out. So you go from a centralized place within Jerusalem to suddenly Peter having that vision to say, we can talk to Gentiles. We want Gentiles in the church. This is where the church is going. This is where the faith is going. The faith is just not the Jewish people. It's with everybody. Gentile just means everybody who's not Jewish. So it's everybody. And so now the movement starts moving out into the rest of the world. And then who was the biggest disciple or apostle, or however you want to say it, who spread the gospel around the most? Paul. Yes, Mr. Paul. So you have Paul, and so then you start hearing less of Peter, and you hear about Paul, and a little later we get about Mary, if you get the joke. Peter Paul. There we go. I didn't say it was a good joke. So we get Peter. So Peter's role within in the book of Acts starts becoming a lot smaller than it was before, and Paul's importance starts coming to the forefront. And we see that also because if the rest of the book of the New Testament is basically what? Who wrote the majority of the New Testament? Paul did. So we have these letters from these churches that address specific problems. And Paul's trying to give a theological framework for all these things. So in Acts, you're seeing the church start small in Jerusalem, and you start seeing it expand out from there. And you're seeing what happens when the faith hits untested waters. It happens to people that have never heard the gospel before, that are in an environment that has no idea what the gospel is, or any familiarity with it, or maybe some familiarity with it, but they're not they're caustic to it. They don't want anything to do with it. And so that's sort of where we're at right now. So this is where we've begun our expansion. So in chapter 17, we've begun our expansion. We have moved outside of Jerusalem. We are moving around. People are finding out about who Jesus is. And as much as we think people are going to be like, this is great, this is good stuff, we're going to find out today, some people don't care about the Christian faith. They don't care about the message of Christian faith. And I would argue that's where a lot of us are at today. A lot of the world is at today. They don't want to hear the message of Christian. They don't want to hear certain stuff. And there's a particular verse that I'm just going to preach on for Sunday, because I think we're all actually falling into this particular trap, me and myself included. So why don't we have, does someone really want to be, who feels up to reading a whole 9 verses out of Acts right now? And just make the cities' names up. You don't have to read them correctly.
Now when they had traveled through Amphipolis and Apollonia, they came to Thessalonica, where there was a synagogue of the Jews. And according to Paul's custom, he went to them, and for 3 Sabbaths reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining and giving evidence that the Christ had to suffer and rise again from the dead, and saying, "This Jesus whom I am proclaiming to you is the Christ." And some of them were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, along with a large number of the God-fearing Greeks and a number of the leading women. But the Jews...
Yay, I was surprised at that.
There you go.
Prominent one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the Jews, becoming jealous and taking along some wicked men from the marketplace, formed a mob and set the city in an uproar. And attacking the house of Jason, they were seeking to bring them out to the people. When they did not find them, they began dragging Jason and some brethren before the city authorities, shouting, "These men who have upset the world have come here also." And Jason has welcomed them, and they all act contrary to the decrees of Caesar, saying that there is another king, Jesus. They stirred up the crowd and the city authorities who heard these things, and when they had received a pledge from Jason and the others, they released them. The brethren,
That's good. That's good. So, and then let's go to the Thessalonians 1 through 10. Let's see, I always forget where Thessalonians is at. There we go. All right, so who'd like to read 1 Thessalonians 1 through 10? Or the whole first chapter of Thessalonians.
Paul, Silas, and Timothy, to the church of the Thessalonians, and God the Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. Grace and peace to you. We always thank God for all of you and continually mention you in our prayers. We remember before our God and Father your work produced by faith, your labor prompted by love, and your endurance inspired by hope in our Lord Jesus Christ. For we know, brothers and sisters loved by God, that he has chosen you, because our gospel came to you, not simply with words, but also with power, with the Holy Spirit and a deep conviction. You know how we lived among you for our sake. You became imitators of us and the Lord, for you welcomed the message in the midst of severe suffering with the joy given by the Holy Spirit. And so you became a model to all the believers in Macedonia and Arcadia. The Lord's message rang out from you, not only in Macedonia and Arcadia. Your faith in God has become known everywhere. Therefore, we do not need to say anything about it, for they themselves report what kind of reception you gave us. They tell us you turned to God from idols to serve the living and the true God, and to wait for his Son from heaven, whom he raised from the dead, Jesus, who rescues us from the coming wrath.
All right. Okay, so the interesting thing about this particular set of texts is, so how do you look at this text? So again, how would you preach this text on Sunday? I'll just tell you, we're just basically going to do the Acts text, just because we want to get you in and out on Sunday. So
In Acts, I like the statement, these men who have turned the world upside down have come here also.
correct.
So I think you should preach about how we can turn this world upside down.
Exactly. That's what I'm going to do. You got it right. You got a point. You got a point. I I think it gets back to something that we are lacking right now in this particular time and space of our lives, and which is hope. If you ask somebody, do they see hope in the future? Most likely they're going to tell you no. And you can, and I know this just not, I'm just not saying this, out of the side of my mouth. I'm saying this based on what we're seeing in culture right now. So if you watch, so last week I talked about Civil War. So an Alex Garland movie that's come out and is talking about Civil War in the United States. What would that look like? What you see in most science fiction movies right now, or a lot of movies that are looking or dealing with the future, you're seeing a lot of dystopia, meaning what's the worst case scenario that's going to happen in the future. So if you notice, that's changed over a period of time. We were getting, now, you used to get a couple of dystopian movies from time to time, but have you heard of anything called Star Trek before? So back in the early 60s, or late 60s, there was a show called Star Trek. And so what that show proponed was that you had the human race came together. And even though, yes, we had violence, there was war, we eventually came together and we've created this better society and we're going into the stars to explore it. It was a very hopeful future. And you saw that with a lot of shows within the 60s, 70s. You see more, was there dystopia? Yes. Was there, you had Star Wars, there's another one. Hey, Gary.
It's not a fly, it's
So,
me.
all right, so, but you had this promise of a future. Nowadays, I would think if you ask any young person, or if you ask any one of us, do you hope? Do you have hope? What does hope look like? I'd say a lot of us right now, because how many people are hoping that the election goes well in 2024? And how do we hope? Because I think a lot of people are I think this country is in some senses in a sense of dread of what's going to happen come this November, based on whoever wins. I'm not even talking about who's winning or who's not winning, but just the feeling people are having right now. We don't feel hope. And this text today is reminding us that the resurrection is all about hope. So this is an Easter. So again, we're in Easter. When we're reading this text, we're in the, third, fourth week of Easter? 3 weeks? You guys know? Fourth. All right. Third or fourth. We're in one of them.
Well, does Easter count as one?
I don't know. I think so. Let's go
Well,
with
then
it.
it's third.
It's third. Okay.
This will be
So-
the third coming up.
So,
Pastor.
No, actually, last Sunday was the third, according
It
to my.
said third.
Because
No?
the 7th wasn't the 7th. Oh, March 31st was Easter.
There you go.
So 1, 2, 3. This is
The fourth.
okay. So we're on
Because
the
in the
fourth.
Bible study I'm
Yep.
doing, it said it was, Sunday was the third Sunday.
So, okay. So
Okay, we got that settled.
So okay, so
Sorry.
we're on the fourth Sunday of Easter, and so we're preaching this on the fourth Sunday of Easter. So in Easter we need to talk more about resurrection. We need to talk about more about hope. We need to talk about why the resurrection is a big deal, and this is why the resurrection is a big deal, because we all need to have hope, And the reason why I say we don't have a lot of hope right now is because we aren't acting like it. So in the Lutheran Church, right now is especially not acting like it. We are more worried with churches closing and trying to figure out a strategy on how to do that versus how are we celebrating God? What are we doing with the resources we have and the people we have and celebrating what we have and doing good with what we have, as opposed to just hanging, we're getting smaller. Things aren't going well. Okay, yes, and that's a reality that we have to live into. But we can choose how we live into that reality. And the choices we see that these people are making are the choices we should be making. How do we live into that resurrection? Yeah, we're flipping the world on its head. Yeah, the world right now is telling us you should just be hopeless right now. You should be in fear. You should live in fear right now. And the gospel is saying exactly the opposite. You should live in hope right now. You need to live out of love right now. You need to work together right now. Everything it's an exact opposition to all the messages that we get from our social media, from the media itself in general. I'm not saying there's some nefarious thing out there that's saying, okay, you need to, there's some central person within the media saying, okay, we're going to create this story today to, bring everybody down. But the media is not designed for good news. There's millions of good stories that happen every day, people helping people, and how many of them get on the news?
Maybe one at the end.
Maybe
at the end.
one at the end, one bright
America's
star.
Strong, right?
Yeah.
Right.
On ABC.
Yeah, but that's not the world. The world is, think of all the good things that are happening each and every day that we don't know about. The things that you guys are doing each and every day that is not newsworthy. Well, I hate to tell you, it is newsworthy. Our idea of newsworthy is wrong.
You
I mean,
got it.
Yeah,
I experienced it. There is a lot of good people out there.
yeah, absolutely.
And we should be thankful for them
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
I
And-
try and be, but
Yeah, and so so we get to make a choice every day, and the choices that we have been led to believe is despair, is hopelessness, is buy this next product because it's going to make you feel better, but it's really when we start leaning into the resurrection more. This story today, because if we look at what Paul's saying, he's telling us, and you became imitators of us and of the Lord. And for in spite of persecution, you received the word with joy. With joy. Even in the midst of all the crap that's going on, you acted with joy. And so this is what this message is about. I think this message is about today. I'll bias you towards that. But
So maybe you should use a word like focus.
yeah,
Okay, where's your focus right
Where's
now?
your
Is it
focus?
on the events of things that are going on right now in the
Right.
world? Or is your focus more on the message of your Christian faith? You
Right.
know,
Right.
So, I mean, we all get distracted
Mm-hmm.
by things that are going on, and like you said, if you watch the news, most of it's negative and
Right.
bad things are happening and all that, but maybe we need to refocus our center of attention on what's really important.
yeah.
And joy is contagious.
Joy is contagious.
Also, if we're talking about resurrection in Thessalonians, it talks about the living and true God.
Yes.
So the living God, which they weren't used to. It was always
Right.
idols and.
Yep.
Well, I mean, things couldn't have been back in the time of Thessalonians. I mean, there are a lot of bad things going on there.
Right.
What's happened in America, in my view, is that Americans are always known as being an optimistic people who were kind of can-do-ish,
Right.
and we're not like that anymore. I mean, there's a
Why can't we?
pessimism, but there's a pessimism that's pervading everything, and
So let's change that.
yeah, right.
Yeah, because they talk about how good the economy is, but then they say in the next statement, but the average person doesn't feel that. And it's just like,
or else
oh,
gasoline,
come on.
or else gasoline is going up 10 cents more. I mean,
And they don't even figure that into the inflation index.
So, but like I said, so one of the questions I always get asked is, so if you're a Christian, everything good's going to happen to you. And I say, no. The way that we work through it, the framework that we have, though, is different. So the same event can happen to the same person. And the way that we react to it is different. And we react out of a sense of hope, out of a sense of God walking with us. This is why we have our hope. That's why we have our optimism. That's why we know things aren't down and gloomy, is because we have a God who walks with us through this, which is why we have hope. And so even if stuff is not like what we want, we suffer some losses, things don't go our way, we still have hope. And
That's one thing I heard on KTIS the other day. It was WWJD, what would Jesus do? And he said, no, it's what will Jesus do? He is a living God,
Right.
he's with you.
yeah,
So, and I thought that stuck with me.
Yeah.
What will he do?
exactly. And I think that's, I'll use that. What will Jesus?
I didn't either and that really hit. I mean, he's not dead. He's
Yeah,
right here.
exactly. And so how are we living our lives differently? So, and if we really let this play out, then it will change how you live your life. It'll change your lens for the day, for your life. If you see life through the lens of the resurrection, you're going to see life a lot differently. I'm not saying don't ever watch the news. What I'm saying with that is don't get down by the news. The news is designed for you to want to watch the news more. What do? They give you more and more stories because people, we are social creatures, we like to see car accidents. We do. We like to see somebody else going downhill. We want because then it's not happening to
I
us.
mean, the tornado that struck their house, but
Right.
struck our house.
Exactly. I mean, that's who we are as people. We want to see that. But the gospel invites us to say, okay, that's perspective, but instead of just sitting there watching them, what are you doing to help? What are you doing to change the world and changing your own outlook? And that's what this text is really forcing us to
So
do.
as a tool, it's helped me. I certainly don't have answers, but as a tool to change your focus, that's why maybe daily Bible reading is a good idea.
Yeah.
Okay?
Absolutely.
So that you have, your focus starts out either at the beginning of the day, at the end of the day, or wherever you put it in your day, that you have that kind of a focus on what the gospel says, and
Yeah, I have two thoughts. The focus needs to be on the gospel message.
Yep.
But to me, it's not surprising that the movies, that the media is depressing because there aren't a whole lot of Christians running. I mean, Hollywood is not a Christian hotbed. And,
No. I'm shocked at that.
but, so that doesn't surprise me. And then even churchgoers or Christians, believing Christians, have they aren't real Bible literate
Correct.
anymore.
Correct.
And if you read your Bible, you know there's hope
Mhm.
because that's what it's all about. Even the worst time the world's ever seen is still coming.
Right.
I mean, it's bad now.
Yeah.
But the worst time is still coming. But we know that that's not the end of it, because then Jesus will return. And it's the Bible literacy of Christians is not where it should be.
Correct.
And just percentage-wise, there's more and more non-believers,
Mhm.
so they're not into that hope.
Right. And so, like I said, I think it's, so it's no wonder that when we look in the text again, that the ruffians, I always love that. They use the British term there, ruffians, at least in mine text, that you have people that come in and say, hey, these Christians are throwing everything on its head. Well, yeah, they have a different, if you are hopeless and someone starts spouting hope at you, you get mad at that. How dare they have hope? How dare they think differently than we? And so it's not a surprise when they come in and I think it is funny that the way that they end up the thing is, at least in mine, it's just they've taken bail. They pay a little bit of money and then they're out.
Let 'em
So
go.
yeah, which I thought was a little funny, but yeah, I think it's people when you have a distinctly different. I'm not going to say worldview, but way of your perception of looking at things is so significantly different and so joy filled. And if people aren't joy filled, they don't like that. The other thing I've noticed too is when somebody's hurting, what they want you to do is hurt. People don't like to hurt by themselves. They want to share the hurt with somebody else. So they will intentionally, whether they like to admit it or not, so if somebody's hurting, they will try to hurt somebody else because they want someone else to feel the same pain they're going through.
Just like yesterday, there a Dukov shot in Syracuse, New York.
Yeah. So and like I said, I think it's when people are hurting, they don't know how to deal with that, and so how do you deal with hurt? How do you deal with pain? If you have a different perspective on things, if you have the world perspective, which is to say, well, since I hurt, somebody else needs to hurt.
Well, just look at Iran and Israel.
Yeah.
It's like, how are you gonna retaliate?
Right. Who's gonna retaliate next? And that's what the world says, that you need to retaliate. You got hit, so you need to hit somebody back, and you don't just hit them back the same. You hit them harder. And so This message here today is saying, wait a minute. Jesus is preaching just something different. And it's not weakness. Some people would say, well, it's weakness if you're not retaliating back. That's strength to say, I don't need to hit back.
Remember I told you yesterday that Orthodox Christian preacher I listened to in Australia, he got a radical Muslim come up and stabbed him many times. But he was able to get to his feet even after that, and he put his hands on the guy's head and started praying for him. So what does that tell you?
Yeah. I mean, it's a different perspective. And so this is,
I mean, he didn't retaliate. He prayed for him.
yeah. So how do we begin to do that? So that's the hard piece of this, because we've lived our lives without really focusing on who Jesus is and what this message of promise means, this resurrection means. So I think one of the things I'm going to say on my sermon on Sunday, this is either going to be the best message you've ever heard in your whole life, or this is going to be the stupidest message you've ever heard. Because it is. It's and unfortunately it's binary right now. As much as I hate doing that, where I like black and white, or however you want to do it, but when we tune into the full message of Jesus, that changes everything.
But the message of Jesus itself is binary.
Yeah,
You either believe in him or you don't.
right. Yeah. So like I said, if you believe this stuff, and that's not to say that we're getting it right every time. So I don't want people to say, okay, I believe it, so why isn't it working? It's like, well, it's a process. It takes a while to get there. It's hard. It's hard to put your whole trust in God. And there's parts of us that pull back. And so how do we begin to fully allow ourselves to be in God's presence, to embrace that message and to think this way? It's not going to happen overnight. But if we begin to do it slowly, time by time by time, you will see a change in yourself and the people around you.
There are also forces that we're fighting against.
Oh yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So that adds to the time element.
It does. It does. But if, like I said, if you engage this belief today, or whenever, sooner the better, I would challenge you that you will start seeing changes in how your whole world perception will change. When the bad things happen in your life, they happen. They're still going to happen. I'm not going to say that nothing bad is going to happen. Whoever says that, Christians, nothing bad happens to Christians hasn't been living life. Bad things will happen, but your perspective on how you deal with them is going to be different. Yes, bad things are going to happen, but how are we going to get through them? You're going to hear a lot of we. And that could be your church community, that could be your husband and wife, that could be your kids, your family, your church family, all that stuff. It's we. How are we going to get through this? It's not going to be how am me going to get through this. How not just how I'm going to do this, how are we going to do this? And that's why I tell people when they're going through tough stuff, I say this is how we're going to go through it. It's not going to be you. You're not just doing this by yourself. We are going through this with you. God's going with this with you. We as a community are going through this with you. We are with you as best as we can. And that's a shift, when you think of it that way. So, and you see it and this isn't just some hokey thing that I dreamed up. This is what we see in the gospel, or in the Acts stuff from, it's we. Paul, Silas, and the rest of the community is doing this, right? We see that in the Thessalonians as well as in Acts, that this is a community effort. This isn't just Paul going out there and saying, okay, this is the Paul show. This is this church coming together to do this. So I don't got to preach on Sunday. There you go. You got the sermon. It's all done.
By the way, it says here in the next part that they spirited them out of the community the next day or whatever.
Yeah.
They paid bail or what, a bond, but they also left.
Oh yeah, they left.
They weren't going to hang around.
No. And that's the reason why he wrote back to the Thessalonians and said, hey, you guys are doing a lot of work. I appreciate what you did. This is the reason why Paul wrote these letters, was to encourage people, because he couldn't always be there with them.
Yeah, it talks about their work of faith and labor of love and steadfastness of hope.
Yeah. Yeah, because again, as we talk about these communities, this small community that they were in probably wasn't much bigger than the number of people that showed up on Sunday mornings here. So you probably didn't have a very So this wasn't thousands of people that were in this church. There were probably maybe 100, maybe 20, maybe 15. These churches that we're talking about right now are not huge churches. They are
And
not.
they were faced with a lot of persecution.
Right. Yeah.
So they were doing a lot of it in
Exactly.
secret,
Exactly.
in homes.
They were doing it in homes. Yeah. They were not going
They
to a
didn't
big
want to get
building like this.
stoned.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, and you're talking about your Christian faith in the Jewish synagogue too. So you're basically you're not going to a church like this. You're going to a different religious service and saying, let's talk about Jesus.
And some of the Jews are going like,
Right. It'd be sort of like coming to a Christian church nowadays. Let's talk about Mormonism. You know, how receptive would we be if someone wanted to talk about Mormonism during the middle of our Lutheran church service? Probably would not be really receptive to that. And that's sort of what they're doing, is they're going into the main religion body and saying, hey, let's talk about Jesus. People are like, who? Why do you want to talk about this guy? Because this doesn't jive with our Judaism right now. So
Yeah, but they didn't accuse him of not, well, they didn't accuse him of,
like heresy or something like
yeah,
that.
for the Jewish religion. They
No,
accused
no.
him of being promoting another king.
Correct. Because that way you can get the authorities involved. Because if you have a religious argument, so let's say we had a religious argument about Melanchthon and Luther, who was the better Lutheran scholar. People aren't really going to care about that. You know, the authorities, you're not going to call the police and say, you know, we got these people saying that Melanchthon was a better Lutheran philosopher than Luther was. You got to come and arrest them. They're going to laugh at you and go like, okay, I'm sorry you have a difference of opinion, but there's no rules being broken. It's a totally different thing to say, well, you know, they're saying that Melanchthon was a better scholar, which means that they also are planning to kill the president. So you need to take care of them. You know, there's a whole different argument that these guys are making. So that's the reason why they're appealing to them, saying, well, they want someone else other than Caesar to be king, because then the authorities will get involved. Then they'll actually take action versus here's our two separate opinions. So
That was the only way they got Pilate to
yeah,
do
absolutely.
anything either.
Absolutely. You make it a civil case, and then that's what you can do something, or a legal case. So, but what else about the text? Anything else about this particular text that you found interesting?
I like in Thessalonian, it says, in 7, so that you became an example to all the believers.
Yeah.
So, that's maybe something for us to strive to.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing too, is, you know, when we do our best to follow Christ, we also imitate Christ, and people can see that we do that. Because your lives, all of our lives, have meaning. You know, you can tell me, well, I don't have a big Instagram following. I don't have a big Facebook group. I don't talk to a lot of people on X, formerly known as Twitter, as they always say. I don't know why. Just call it Twitter.
because that's
But
what people.
I know. But each one of you influences a ton of people every day. You influence everybody you interact with. And so what you do matters. Even though we don't feel like it, even though we're not a movie star, you interact and affect people, I would argue, more so than any movie star will ever do, because of your individual actions.
The old adage, actions speak louder than words.
Correct. And your actions actually reflect what your beliefs are. You can tell me all day that you love ice cream, but if I keep seeing you throw ice cream down the sink, then I know that you're not telling me the truth.
You just change your name to James instead of Paul.
I don't know if it fits in here, but another very significant thing that happened was the Council of Jerusalem,
Mm-hmm.
where, you know, essentially the early Christian church was Jewish,
Right.
but for the Jews.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea was that, no, we're going to open up the church to Gentiles,
That was a big deal.
you know. And so here we are in Thessalonica,
Mhm.
and they go to a synagogue. They, you know, I suppose it has some relation to the maybe the Jews in Thessalonica should have known about the Council of Jerusalem, and that
Yeah.
it wasn't just an exclusive Jewish Christian church, but it was.
Right. And you also see there's also the interesting thing too, the way that gets portrayed in Acts, and I forget what letter of Paul there is. There's a difference in how the perception of that council goes too. Like who's the one that really
Open the door.
opened the doors?
Yeah.
So you have a lot of
Well, you got Peter's faction, and you got
right Paul's faction.
Paul's faction.
So, which is like I said, you also in terms of Acts, you hear less of Peter as we go forward because Paul is the main missionary. Paul's the one that does most of the work, as Paul normally
And
does.
yet they named a church in Rome after
Who did Luke travel with?
Paul. Yeah, I'm not saying there's not any bias there.
And yet they name it the first church
Well, yes,
in
yeah,
Rome
yeah,
after Peter.
yeah, yeah.
St. Peter's Church in Rome, you know.
Right. Right. So, but you can make that based on the text, though, too. I will build my rock on you. So, what's this first church? Because Jesus didn't tell Paul that; he told Peter that. So,
Is Greek another word for Gentiles, or were they actually Greeks?
so Gentiles is the term for any non-Jewish. So it can be Greek. So Gentiles can be Greek. They could be Roman. They could be
Because in my Bible it says the Greeks, and not usually. But
So Gentiles, Greeks would be so all Gentiles are everything other than, so not
Jews.
all Gentiles are Greeks, but all Greeks would be Gentiles, if that makes sense.
okay.
Since Thessalonica is in Greece, that
And a lot of present-day Turkey was once under the control of the Greeks
Yeah.
until like the 1920s when there was a war between the Greeks and the Turkish over that. So now you go like Ephesus is in Turkey today. There's other on Paul's missionary journeys. There's a lot of those. Well, they all took
Yeah.
place in Asia Minor or Turkey. So
Yeah.
What more can you tell me about the house of Jesus?
Not much. There wasn't very much in the, just that he was someone who was sympathetic to their cause or a follower of Jesus, and he put them up for the night, and they found out that people didn't like his Airbnb, and they wanted to shut it down, and so then they spirited away Paul and Silas and said, "You guys hang out in the closet. We'll take care of this, and then we'll get you out of here." So. Yeah, he just was. I think they just wanted to. I think some of the reason why they named him was just to say give him a lot of credit for sticking up for being sort of their Airbnb, but then also when the mob came, he was just like, okay, let's go. If you want to, let's do a talk about it. We'll get it all straightened out, figured out, and he must have did some fancy talking too, and the Spirit must have obviously been with them because in previous cases, the person who helped them actually suffered a lot physically. But Jason on their hand, yeah, here's 2 bits. There you go. All right, we'll talk to you later. I don't know what this
I
whole
was
was about.
wondering if he was more established as a leader in the community, that
He could have
had
been.
a little bit more.
He could have been. He could have had maybe a little bit more pull, or he could have been a merchant, or he could have been someone within the community that people are like, oh, Jason just was like, you know who I am. You know what I'm doing. What am I doing that's really off-putting to you guys? You know, have I ever done anything wrong? And they're like, no. They're like, then why are you being jerks today? Well, they made me do it. I'm like, okay.
Give us
Yeah.
some money.
Give me some
we'll
money.
be fine.
Give me some. So they're like, so how do we get out of this? Do I just give you a couple dollars? Do you want to come down to the store? I'll give you something to eat. What do you want to do? All right, we'll give you some money. There you go.
My Bible said that, although as little is known of him, Paul had a relative of that name
Yeah.
in Romans
Oh.
16:21.
So that's the hard part too, because they don't give us last names and stuff too. So, but
But he was important. enough.
yeah, he was important enough to name. So just so whenever you see somebody named, they're just important enough to name. They want to give them credit for whatever they did.
So he was probably significant.
Probably to the church community
Yeah,
somehow,
yeah.
but we don't know. Was it a
No, we don't.
relative of Paul? Was he a leader? Was he a businessman? Was he, you know, who was he? We don't know. All we know is he helped Paul, and you know, so
He helped to turn the world upside down.
absolutely, absolutely. So
And
yeah,
you know, he doesn't even say, but the Holy Spirit could have intervened here.
absolutely.
And
That's what I
saved
would.
the guy's life here,
Yeah,
so.
I think. Well, and that's having that faithful, to have hope, to know that even in the midst of this crowd, in the midst of that chaos, you don't do it by yourself, and you know that the Holy Spirit's going to be with you, and that whatever outcome is going to happen, you know God's going to be with you.
So there's another part you could throw into your sermon on Sunday, talk about the Holy Spirit. You know?
The other thing that Lutherans don't like to talk about.
Well, I know, that's what I mean. Make it more comfortable.
The Spirit is anything but comfortable. The Spirit is all about making you and me feel discomfort. That's what the Spirit's about. It's not about comfort. The Holy Spirit is never about comfort.
We're
Unless...
talking about the idea of even talking about it.
Right, true.
That's what I'm
True,
talking
true. True. So anything else you want to talk about? Otherwise, we'll get to prayers for today.
I had one other thought. It
Yes.
doesn't say it in the text, but he says he went to the synagogue and
Mhm.
talked. But he had a lot of Greeks and leading women come to believe in Jesus too. And they would not have been allowed in the synagogue.
Correct. So that he also would talk outside of the synagogue too. So I think, Paul was
He was a talker.
like me. Yes. Yes. I think that's probably.
We could have done it at the
Poor
marketplace.
punctuation.
That's where people-
Just ran everything.
Well, I think you get it. So the other thing too is you always get the economy of words within the text as well too. I haven't read a biblical text that I feel is, well, maybe the Psalms, but I mean, they always have the economy of words. They only put as much as they need to for you to understand the point, and that's about it. I don't feel there's a lot of fluff. You don't hear a lot of them, and they moved the wooden door made out of oak, and the wind smelled of they don't they don't do a good job of adding stuff. So it's really, they just seem like the economy of words.
And it said Paul was there for 3 weeks, so he was coming and going all the time.
Yeah. And we don't know what he did. And that's the frustrating part. It would be nice to know what he did.
What
But
did he do?
What did he do?
For a living?
Well, no, when he came in and out for 3 weeks, what was he doing? Was he talking to people? Was he going to the synagogue? Was he going to the fish market, buying fish? Was he making tents?
Working on tents.
Yeah, was he working on tents?
No, he was arguing the scriptures.
Or was he arguing the scriptures?
It said.
What was their arguments about? I mean, stuff that we would like to know. Back then, again, for economy of words, they just were like, this is what he did something for 3 weeks. Okay. No. I think,
It's a story of the spread of the gospel.
correct.
That's what.
But we as Americans, we like details. Give us details. Tell us what's going on. I want to know.
This BSF just last night, John 20. John doesn't include details.
Nope.
He's
Yeah.
and
Economy
at
of
the
words.
end, there are many other signs in the presence of the disciples which are not written down. But these are written so that you may believe in Jesus as the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life. Just enough to take care of his.
Yeah. And I'd say, John, you're teasing us. Please stop that. I want to know. Give me details. I want to know. So that's what. So that's Acts 17. So take your faith today and flip somebody's life on its head. It's a good challenge, right?
I'm a detail person as well.